After two UK chancellors didn't last long enough to even hold the famous red box, the new finance minister, Jeremy Hunt, is all set to present the autumn budget, and he is under immense pressure to get it right in his very first attempt. Not only does Hunt have the burden to kickstart the British economy, he also needs to correct his predecessor's mistakes. The autumn financial statement usually doesn't garner so much interest. The main budget is presented in March every year, but this year is nothing like previous years. The United Kingdom has had 3 prime ministers in 7 weeks, and the entire focus now is on Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his plan to pull the country out of its economic turmoil. The central message would need to be about restoring stability and getting inflation under control. To do that, Jeremy Hunt says a tax hike is in store for all British nationals. The Chancellor has already reversed the highly controversial mini-budget tax cuts amounting to $30 billion. He has also raised a further $4 billion by cancelling the basic income tax rate cuts. The government is likely to stick to cash spending limits that were decided on last year. A series of allowances will also be frozen. The UK is spending 4 times as much on energy as it would during normal times. And then there are other factors: the war in Ukraine, the COVID pandemic, and of course the fallout of Brexit. It's been a wild few months for the UK economy, and the government is desperate to raise more money. So the coming months will be tough for the British people. UK inflation has hit a 41-year high just when Jeremy Hunt was readying his budget. The major challenge is to present policies which will actually pass muster in Parliament. So a nod from fellow Tory members in the opposition is crucial. At about 12 noon local time, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt will be seen with his red briefcase outside 10 Downing Street. After posing for the cameras, he will enter the Prime Minister's residence and then finally head to Parliament. The famous red box will decide what's in store for the United Kingdom.
So there was no South Korean test in place.
For more on this story, we are joined by WION correspondent Alex Isat, who is in London. At this point, we're also joined by Mark Brolin, an economist, a geopolitical strategist, and an author. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us. Alex, let me start with you. Just yesterday, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer had issued an unmistakable warning: expect tough decisions. This comes at a time when the figures that have come out, whether it's with regard to inflation or the economy and its growth, are not looking good for the United Kingdom. Therefore, when the Prime Minister and the Chancellor say expect tough measures, what can we expect? Is a tax hike almost inevitable?
Absolutely, we are going to be expecting quite a lot of changes from the Liz Truss economy, where she was all talking about growth and how to improve growth through tax cuts. We are going to see some hikes here and also spending cuts. We do understand that what was going to be mentioned, there's going to be potentially some money put aside for the NHS and for schools. How much, obviously, we don't know yet. But where the other spending cuts kind of come in, it's probably going to be hitting government, other government sectors, as well as defence. Now, we do think that Jeremy Hunt is going to say that he's going to look at putting public sector pay rises in around the 2%. Although, as you well know, the strikes that have been going on throughout the whole year, in fact, they've been asking for the pay rise to be in line with pensions. So they're asking for about 17%. So that 2% that may well be in the budget may lead to even further strikes, as we're going to be seeing into the winter, and especially with the nurses and the NHS staff, which I know a lot of people on the ground are really concerned about. But we're talking about other cuts, and we're going to be looking at the thresholds. So that means that people with middle and higher earnings will be taxed at a lower threshold, so there'll be more money coming from that. And then there's going to be potentially a windfall tax. Now, Liz Truss said that she wouldn't be charging the windfall tax, but it looks like that now might be back on the agenda, which is good news from those that are profiteering off gas and obviously wind farms. That money will then hopefully be coming into the government. Now, we're looking to try and fill this around £50 billion black hole. So I think we're going to be hearing a lot of where we're going to be seeing these cuts and where they're going to be coming from, when we hear from Jeremy Hunt later this morning.
All right, stay on with us, Alex. We'll come back to you. Let me now go across to Mark Brolin. Mark, we mentioned earlier the autumn budget in the UK does not usually garner so much attention or interest, but then these are unprecedented times for the country. Inflation, as we've reported, is at a 4-decade high. The energy crisis is almost unprecedented. There's utter economic turmoil, not to mention the political turmoil the country has seen. And now there is a looming recession. So what are your expectations from today's budget? Would you say taxes and more taxes?
Yes, there will be more taxes and more spending cuts. And I think one of the key things today will be the ratio between spending cuts and taxes, because the left will, of course, attack him if he does big spending cuts, and the trade unions and Labour Party, whereas those within his own party, they will be more fiercely opposing tax rises. So the ratio between these two figures will be highly important optics of it. And it looks like the spending cuts will be, at the moment, it looks like spending cuts will be slightly higher than the tax rises, like a 55-45 ratio. And that's probably the balancing act he will try to pull off to slightly appease both sides. I mean, it's not possible to appease either side, because he will be attacked whatever he does, but he has to sort of mitigate the attacks.
He will be attacked no matter what he does, but he will try his best to mitigate the attacks. That's an interesting take, Mark Brolin. We'll come back to you in a moment. Alex, let me come back to you. Now, Jeremy Hunt has said that his primary focus will be on restoring stability and getting inflation under control. And he realizes that for that, tax hike is inevitable for all British nationals. He's asked them to brace themselves for it. What are some of the other tough measures that we can expect? We've talked about spending cuts. These are times of austerity, though some might say that when a recession is looming, spending cuts by the government may not necessarily be the best measure, but maybe the UK government doesn't have a choice right now. So as Mark Brolin says, do you also believe that this government will try and pull off that balancing act?
I think they're going to have to try. There isn't really ever any other option out there. The other option is borrowing, and that's what Liz Truss was doing with her mini budget, and then we got into this disaster with the market. You know, the opposition party have said that they believe that if they were in power, then they would try down the borrowing route as well. But with the Bank of England putting interest rates up, borrowing is actually more expensive. So we're going to be putting on more debt onto the UK. So we don't need that. At the moment, our debt ratio is actually quite low, and it's better than some European countries. So we don't want to be pushing up that debt, because that's going to affect the nation in the long term. Right now, there needs to have this gap, and it has to be done, you know, probably through the spending cuts, and also with the windfall tax and the threshold tax. All of these have to really be thought through. This has been a long time coming, even it has been a short period, but it has been a long time coming. The Conservative government had seen these problems throughout the last couple of years. During COVID, we said footfall, fall. We've also got the OBR forecast. That's going to come in this afternoon after the budget, and we're expecting that to see that we didn't have much UK growth. And that's a real problem as well for looking to what things are going to be costing: food, petrol, and getting things into the country. So we're going to be seeing the cost of everything continuing to rise. So at the moment, there isn't really much option apart from all of these spending cuts, because borrowing isn't really there. And I do believe that he is in a bit of a rock and a hard place at the moment to see exactly what he's going to do. But the main concern, I think, for many people are going to be the strikes as well, that are going to potentially be coming in the winter, as we see more and more public services potentially falter.
Take care, Alex. You have an important day ahead of you. Don't get blown away by the wind. Thanks for that update. Let me go back to our guest, Mark Brolin. Mark, now, you know, a lot of people are saying that not only does Jeremy Hunt have to focus on the tough job of restoring some much needed economic stability and bringing back that confidence that has been lost, he also has to correct the mistakes of his predecessors. Not to mention the fact that there are many critics who say that this government led by Rishi Sunak simply does not have any legitimacy given the circumstances under which he came to power. Keeping all of that in mind, how big a challenge is it going to be for Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt to make sure that whatever changes they bring about as part of this budget will actually pass muster in Parliament? Because there are fears it's not just the opposition, the Tories themselves, in fact, could pose some challenges.
Well, they could, but they also know, the Conservative MPs know that there will be, many of them will lose their jobs in the next election unless they sort of pull together behind him. So I think possibly this time, slightly uniquely over the recent years, they might be behind him. Because they know unless the budget goes well, unless the economy picks up before the next election, they will probably lose the next election. But there are so many uncertainties here that makes this also very interesting in a way, because we don't know the size of the budget hole. Everyone sort of pretends that the size of the budget hole is about 54 billion, but that's in a way that's slightly humorous, because nobody knows that, and we don't know inflation, and because we don't know the size of the inflation, we don't know interest rates. So there's so many unknown factors. So it's in a bit, it's actually a finger in the air. But I do think, going back to your question, that the party might actually rally behind him on this one.
The party majors rally behind Jeremy Hunt because they realize they need to stay in power for as long as they can, because the next election may not bring any good news for the Tories. That's a very interesting perspective. Thanks very much, Mark Brolin, for speaking to WION.